You're a traitor, Bianca. You told everyone my husband cheated, didn't you? The dining room went dead quiet. My sister, Jade, stood at the head of the table, her voice cutting through the holiday cheer like a jagged blade. Dad stared at his glass of wine like the answer was at the bottom of it, and Mom wouldn't even look up from her plate. My aunts Polly and Ruth, my uncle Scott Bowen, and even my cousin Louie, they all turned in unison. Their eyes were filled with a pre-packaged judgment. I haven't said a word to anyone, Jade, I said. My voice sounded thin, fragile. Liar, she shrieked. You've always been jealous. You're trying to tear my life down because yours empty. I looked at Mom and Dad, waiting for one of them to say something, to defend the daughter who actually showed up when they needed help. Dad just cleared his throat and looked away. The betrayal, it tasted like copper in my mouth. I stood up, my chair screeching against the hardwood, and I walked out. As I reached the porch, the cold Chicago air slapped me across the face. My Afghan hound, Fawn, was waiting there. She stood tall, her long, silky coat shifting in the wind, looking more composed than anyone inside that house. She didn't bark, she just nudged my hand with her narrow snout, a solid, elegant presence that reminded me I wasn't actually alone. Mom stepped out a second later. Bianca, just apologize. You know how Jade gets. This family can't handle more drama. She lied, Mom. She's the one ruining the holiday. Just be the bigger person, she said, her voice flat. Go back in there and let it go. I didn't answer. I led Fawn to my sedan, watching her gracefully slide into the back seat. I wasn't going back to that table. I was going to find out exactly why Jade needed a scapegoat so badly, and then I was going to make sure the rest of the family saw the truth. I realized then that being the bigger person is just a polite way of asking you to carry someone else's lies. Jade thinks she's used me as the final piece of her puzzle, but she forgot that when you cast someone as the villain, you lose control over how they play the role. Fawn watched me from the back seat, her eyes calm and knowing, and as I pulled out of the driveway, I knew that the piece they wanted wasn't worth the price of my dignity. The drive back to my apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the heater and the occasional shift of Fawn in the back seat. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Polly or Scott Bowen, I felt another brick added to the wall I was building around my heart. They weren't asking for my side, they were demanding my submission. I pulled into my garage and walked into the quiet of my home. Fawn followed me, her claws clicking softly on the hardwood. I sat at the counter and stared at my phone. A message from Dad. Call your sister, Bianca. Fix this before it gets out of hand. I tossed the phone onto the marble surface. Fix what? Her fiction? I pulled up the shared family email account for the Gilbert Trust Fund. Jade always insisted on handling the boring stuff. As I scrolled, my eyes snagged on a thread from a real estate agent I didn't recognize. Confirmation of deposit, $50,000. I sucked in a quick breath. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. No one was supposed to touch a dime without a group vote. I looked over at Fawn, who was watching me with those deep, intelligent eyes. She didn't just lie about a marriage, Fawn. She's buying a house with our money. I realized then the scene at dinner wasn't just a sisterly spat. It was a preemptive strike. Heavy, shuddering breath. If Jade could make me the traitor, no one would believe me when I started asking about the money. I wasn't just the odd one out anymore. I was a threat she needed to neutralize. I reached for my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark kitchen, reflecting in Fawn's steady gaze. It was time to stop being the bigger person and start being the one with the receipts. I realized that a lie isn't just a story, it's a fortification. Long, weary sigh. My sister didn't just build a wall to keep me out, she built a vault to hide what she'd stolen. But vaults have combinations, and I've spent my whole life watching her hide the keys. Fawn rested her narrow snout on my knee, and as I typed in the password, I knew that the silent treatment was finally over. Now I was the one who was going to speak. By 3 a.m., my kitchen was a sea of printed bank statements and laptop windows. Fawn lay curled at my feet, her chin resting on my slipper, occasionally letting out a soft huff as I paced. Every time I dug deeper into the Gilbert Trust records, the pit in my stomach grew. Jade hadn't just taken $50,000. There were smaller, calculated transfers, $20,000 here, $15,000 there, all funneled into an account labeled J-G Holdings. It was sloppy, or maybe she just thought I was too independent to ever look. My phone buzzed, a text from Aunt Ruth. "We're all meeting at Polly's tomorrow for brunch. Jade will be there. We expect an apology so we can move on." The arrogance of it made my hands shake. They had already held the trial and found me guilty without a single piece of evidence. I looked down at Fawn. She looked up, her regal face tilting as if sensing the shift in my energy. She wasn't just a pet, she was the only witness to my sanity right now. I didn't reply to Ruth. Instead, I called Caleb Cole, a private investigator I'd worked with last year. "Caleb, it's Bianca Gilbert," I said. "I need you to track a paper trail on a real estate purchase, and I need to know who my sister has been talking to." "Late night for family drama?" Caleb's voice was raspy but alert. "It's not drama anymore," I replied. I was staring at a digital copy of a signature on a transfer. It looked like Dad's, but the slant was off. It was Jade's handwriting, disguised as his. It's a crime. I hung up and looked at the clock. Brunch was in 9 hours. Jade wanted a performance? I'd give her one, but it wouldn't be the one she scripted. I realized that the hardest part of uncovering a lie isn't the truth itself. It's realizing how many people were willing to believe the lie just to keep their seats at the table. My sister thinks she's forged a masterpiece, but she forgot that even the best forgeries fall apart under the right light. Fawn rested her weight against my shins, and as the printer hummed in the dark, I knew that tomorrow's brunch wouldn't be about an apology, it would be about an unmasking. The sun rose over a gray, slushy Chicago morning. I hadn't slept, but the adrenaline kept me upright. Fawn paced by the door, her long, elegant strides mirroring my own restless energy. She knew the vibe had changed. The air in the apartment was thick with the scent of old coffee and a new, sharp resolve. I dressed carefully, not in the casual sweaters my family expected, but in a tailored charcoal suit, the kind I wear to win multi-million-dollar bids. If I was going into a lion's den, I was going to look like the person who owned the cage. My phone lit up with a call from Dad. I let it ring. I already knew what he'd say. "Don't be difficult, Bianca. Just keep the peace." "Let's go, Fawn," I said. I drove toward Aunt Polly's house, my hands steady on the wheel, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. In the driveway, I saw the usual fleet, Scott Bowen's SUV, Jade's convertible. They were already inside, likely rehearsing my intervention. As I stepped onto the porch, Louis opened the door. He looked at me with that familiar, condescending smirk. "You actually showed up," muttered Louis. "Jade's pretty upset, Bianca. You should probably just get it over with." I didn't blink. I walked past him, Fawn's head held high, her presence commanding more respect than anyone in that room deserved. I could hear the clink of silverware. They were waiting for the villain to arrive and beg. I didn't head for the dining room. I detoured toward the coat closet, feeling for the small digital recorder in my blazer. Caleb had sent me a file 10 minutes ago, Jade talking to a lawyer about shielding assets from me. I gripped the device, my jaw tightening. I wasn't here for brunch. I was here for an audit. I realized then that when a family asks you to keep the peace, what they're really asking for is for you to keep their secrets. My sister thinks she's built a fortress out of their loyalty, but she didn't account for the fact that a fortress is only as strong as its foundation, and hers is made of sand and stolen money. Fawn stood perfectly still at my side, her eyes fixed on the dining room door, and as I stepped toward the voices, I knew that the difficult daughter was about to become their biggest problem.
For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Jade sat frozen, her hand still hovering over her mimosa glass. The recording had ended, but her own voice still seemed to echo off the walls, cold, mocking, and undeniably guilty. Scott Bowen was the first to move. He shoved his chair back, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Jade, tell me that wasn't you." Jade didn't look at him. She looked at Mom, her eyes welling with the kind of tears that used to get her anything she wanted. "Mom, it's not what it sounds like. I was trying to protect the assets. Bianca is so reckless with her business. I thought—" "You thought I was a fool," Dad's voice came from the doorway. He had been standing there the whole time. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "You thought I didn't check the logs because I trusted you." The golden child mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "I needed that house," Jade finally snapped, her voice dropping the frailty and turning sharp. "You all act like the trust is some holy relic. I've done more for this family than Bianca ever has. I deserved a win." The room felt smaller. Fawn sensed the shift, her hackles rising as she stepped a few inches closer to the table, her presence a silent warning. Aunt Ruth stood up, her face a mask of disappointment. "You blamed your sister for a failing marriage to cover up a bank robbery, Jade. You didn't just take the money, you took our respect." I watched them all realize that the daughter they'd spent years coddling was the one who had been picking their pockets. Heavy, shuddering breath. Mom just put her head in her hands and wept. Not for me, not yet, but for the version of Jade she had just lost. "The locks on the trust are being changed today," Dad said, his voice flat and final. "And Jade, you have 48 hours to return the deposit, or I'm calling the authorities." I didn't feel the rush of victory I expected. Long, shaky exhale. I just felt tired. I whistled low, and Fawn turned instantly, her long, silky ears sweeping her shoulders as she waited for my lead. "I think we're done here," I said. I realized then that the most painful part of an explosion isn't the blast itself, it's the silence that follows when the dust finally settles. Long, weary sigh. My sister had burned her world down to keep herself warm, and now she was standing in the ashes, wondering why no one was reaching out to save her. Fawn walked ahead of me toward the door, her head held high, and as I stepped out into the biting Chicago air, I realized I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the only one who had survived the fire with my soul intact.
Jade's glass hit the table with a sharp clack, orange juice splashing onto the white linen. For a split second, she looked like she might jump across the table. Then the tears started. On cue, perfectly timed and completely fake. I was doing it for us," she sobbed. "I was trying to invest it to save the family's future. Dad, you have to believe me." Dad stood up, his face a shade of purple I'd never seen before. He wasn't looking at the tears, he was looking at the phone on the table, the device still humming with the silence of the finished recording. "You used my signature, Jade? You forged my name to move $50,000? "I was going to put it back," she wailed.
Aunt Polly leaned back, her face twisted in disgust. "You sat there at Christmas and called Bianca a traitor? You let us all turn our backs on her just to cover your tracks?" "She was always the one who didn't care!" Jade shrieked, finally dropping the frail sister act. She glared at me, her eyes darting to Fawn. "You think you're so much better than us. You don't deserve that money." "It's not about the money, Jade," I said, my voice like ice. "It's about the fact that you were willing to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my parents just to buy a house you couldn't afford." Heavy, shuddering breath. I turned to Mom. She was staring at her lap, her shoulders shaking. She had spent years telling me to be the bigger person, to keep Jade's ego intact. Now there was no bigger person left to hide behind. "I'm leaving," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need their apologies. Fawn turned with me, her tail brushing against the chair as we headed for the door. Long, shaky exhale. Behind us, the room erupted. Scott Bowen was demanding to see the logs, and Dad was finally, for the first time in his life, raising his voice at his favorite daughter. I stepped out into the Chicago wind and felt a strange sense of calm. The bridge was burning, but for the first time in 34 years, I wasn't the one stuck in the middle of the fire. Long, weary sigh. Some fires are necessary. They burn away the rot so you can finally see the foundation. Fawn looked up at me as we reached the car, her coat shimmering in the winter sun, and I realized that being the black sheep was actually a badge of honor. It meant I was the only one who didn't blend into the herd of lies.
I sat in my sedan for a long time, the engine idling while the heater fought off the Chicago chill. Fawn sat in the back, her head resting on the center console, watching me through the rearview mirror with those calm, knowing eyes. My phone was an explosion of notifications. Dad, Bianca, please come back. Aunt Polly, I am so sorry, honey. Louie, Jade is losing her mind. I ignored all of them. I put the car in gear and drove. I didn't go home. I drove toward the lakefront, needing the vast, empty horizon of Lake Michigan to match the space I was finally clearing in my life. When we got to the park, I let Fawn out. The wind was brutal, whipping her long coat around her legs like a storm of silk, but she didn't care. She was a reminder of what it looked like to have grace under pressure. My phone rang. It was Caleb. "I tracked that JG Holdings account," he said. "It's not just one property, Bianca. She's been paying off credit card debts, luxury retail, high-end travel. She wasn't investing for the family. She was living a life she couldn't afford on your dime." "How much total?" I asked, looking out at the white caps on the water. Preliminary count, north of $120,000 over the last 18 months. I felt a sharp, bitter laugh escape my throat. Heavy, shuddering breath. While I was grinding 12-hour days at my firm, Jade was using our grandfather's legacy to buy designer bags and first-class tickets to Cabo. "Send the full report to my father's personal email," I told him, "and Caleb, make sure you CC the family lawyer." I hung up and whistled for Fawn. She came bounding back, her ears flying in the wind. Jade had tried to frame me as the one who didn't care about the family, but she was the one who had treated us like an ATM. Heavy, shaky exhale. The fight wasn't over. My sister is a narcissist, and narcissists don't go down without trying to take everyone with them. I needed to be ready for her next move. I realized that the hardest thing to accept isn't that you were betrayed, it's that you were subsidizing the lifestyle of the person who was destroying you. Long, weary sigh.
My sister didn't just steal my money, she used it to buy the matches she used to set my reputation on fire. Fawn trotted back to the car, her posture as regal as a queen's, and as the cold lake wind hit my face, I knew that the golden child was about to find out how quickly a legacy can turn into a liability.
The following morning, the silence of my apartment was broken by a frantic pounding on the door. Fawn was on her feet instantly, a low, rumbling growl vibrating in her chest. She stood between me and the entryway, her hackle slightly raised. I looked through the security camera feed. It was Jade. She looked disheveled, her expensive wool coat unbuttoned, her eyes rimmed with red. This wasn't the polished sister from Christmas dinner. This was someone who had realized the floor was falling out from under her. "Bianca, open the door," she screamed. "You've ruined everything. Dad's talking about calling the police." I didn't open the door. I walked to the kitchen island and poured a glass of water, my hands perfectly steady. Fawn didn't move from her post. She was a silent sentinel, her gaze fixed on the door as if she could see right through it. "Go home, Jade," I said. "You have to tell them the recording was a mistake. Tell them you exaggerated," she begged. "If they press charges, I lose the house. I lose everything." "You didn't think about that when you were spending money that didn't belong to you," I replied, "or when you called me a traitor." "I was under pressure," she shrieked, her tone shifting to vitriol in a heartbeat. "You've always been the successful one. You don't know what it's like to struggle." The irony was staggering. She was struggling in a house paid for by theft, while I had built my business from a single desk in a studio apartment. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. I checked the camera. She was standing there, staring at the door with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I pulled out my phone and started typing furiously. Minutes later, my phone pinged, a notification from a local community board, a social media tag. Jade had posted a photo of me from years ago with a caption claiming I was mentally unstable and had been harassing the family for money. I realized then that a narcissist's final move isn't to ask for forgiveness, but to try and destroy the person holding the mirror. My sister thinks that a character assassination will distract from her actual crimes, but she forgot that in the digital age, a post is just a breadcrumb for a lawyer to follow. Fawn looked back at me, her narrow snout tilted in a question, and as I took a slow sip of water, I knew that Jade had not just ended our relationship, she had just handed me the evidence I needed to finish the job.
I stared at the screen, watching the comments roll in on Jade's post. Some were skeptical, but others, neighbors, old acquaintances, were already biting. Jade was playing the victim card one last time, hoping to ruin my professional reputation before the legal walls closed in. Fawn sat back on her haunches, sensing the spike in my cortisol. She let out a sharp, authoritative bark, snapping me out of the digital spiral. She was right. Staring at the fire wouldn't put it out. I didn't call Jade. I didn't comment. Instead, I called my firm's legal counsel, and then I forwarded the JG Holdings file, verified by Caleb, to the family group chat. Mom, Dad, Polly, Ruth, Scott Bowen, and Louie. "Since Jade is sharing stories online," I wrote, "I thought I'd share some facts here." The group chat remained silent for exactly 3 minutes. Then it exploded. Scott Bowen, "Jade, what the hell is this? Delete it now." Dad, "Jade, get off social media and get to my house, now." I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and walked over to Fawn, burying my hands in her soft fur. "Let her scream into the void," I whispered. An hour later, the doorbell rang again, not a pounding this time, but a single hesitant ring. I checked the camera. It was Mom. She looked older, her face lined with an exhaustion that a peace-at-all-costs lifestyle couldn't hide anymore. I opened the door, but I didn't step back. Fawn stood firmly in the gap, her tall frame blocking the hallway. "Bianca," Mom whispered. "She deleted the post. He's taking her to a lawyer to discuss restitution. She's lost everything." I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years asking me to be smaller so my sister could feel big. "She didn't lose it, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "She threw it away, and you watched her do it." I realized that the most dangerous person in a family isn't the one who tells the lie, it's the one who stays silent to keep the peace. My mother wanted a hug, a reconciliation, a return to the way things were, but the way things were was a cage, and I'd finally broken the lock. Fawn leaned her weight against my leg, a solid, silver-tan wall between me and my past, and as I looked at my mother, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was sorry.
Mom stood on my doorstep, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "She's your sister, Bianca. She made a mistake, a huge, terrible mistake. But if we go to the police, her life is over." "Her life isn't over, Mom. It's just finally honest," I replied. I looked down at Fawn, who remained a silent, elegant barrier between me and the woman who had spent decades asking me to shrink so Jade could shine. "We can handle this internally," Mom pleaded. "We'll make her pay it back. We'll keep it quiet for the sake of the family name." "The family name is exactly what she used to rob us," I said, "and it's what you used to try and silence me on Christmas. You didn't care about the truth then. You only care now because the lie is too big to hide." Mom flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I was just trying to keep us together." "No," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You were keeping her together at my expense. I'm done being the glue, Mom. If the family falls apart because one person told the truth, then it was already broken." I started to close the door. "Wait," she said. "Will you at least come to the house for the final meeting? The lawyer will be there. Dad wants you there." "I'll be there," I said, "but not for a family meeting. I'll be there as a victim of theft and defamation. Tell Dad to have the paperwork ready." I shut the door and locked it. Heavy, shuddering breath. The click of the deadbolt felt like a period at the end of a very long, exhausting sentence. I walked back into my living room. For the first time in days, I didn't feel the need to check the bank statements. Fawn walked to her bed by the window, circling once before settling down with a satisfied sigh. She knew the intruders were gone. I sat on the sofa, watching the Chicago skyline begin to glow. Jade had one card left to play, the Mercy card. Long, shaky exhale. But she had forgotten that I'd spent my career designing structures that could withstand the heaviest pressure. She wasn't getting mercy, she was getting exactly what she'd earned. I realized then that the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who lied, but the one who expected you to accept the lie for the sake of their comfort. Long, weary sigh. My mother wasn't fighting for the family, she was fighting for the illusion of the family. But you can't live in an illusion once you've seen the blueprints of the truth. Fawn let out one final huff of air, her eyes closing in the twilight, and I realized that the glue didn't just stop holding things together, it finally dried. The air in Dad's study was thick with the smell of old leather and tension. Jade sat in the corner, her eyes fixed on the floor, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Aunt Polly and Scott Bowen were there as witnesses, their faces grim. My lawyer sat next to me, a stack of folders between us that felt like the weight of a dozen years of lies. Fawn sat at my feet, her presence a stark contrast to the nervous energy in the room. She was calm, her head held high, watching Jade with a steady, unwavering gaze. The total amount misappropriated is $128,400, my lawyer stated. That includes the property, the travel, and the defamation attempt. Jade whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll pay it back," Jade whispered, her voice cracking. I need time." "You don't have time, Jade," Dad said, his voice sounding tired. He looked at me, then back at his favorite daughter. "The trust is being frozen. Your access is revoked, permanently." Jade finally looked up. There was no remorse there, only the sharp, jagged remains of her ego. "Are you happy now, Bianca? You're the only one left." "I didn't want this, Jade," I said, leaning forward. "I wanted a sister who didn't view my existence as a threat. But since you couldn't be that, I settled for the truth." The room went silent as the lawyer slid a document across the table, a confession, a repayment agreement. If she signed, no criminal charges, but she would be legally barred from the Gilbert assets forever. Jade gripped the pen, her knuckles white. She looked at Mom, waiting for the usual intervention, the "let's just forgive" speech. But Mom just looked at the floor. The peace at all costs bridge had finally collapsed. Jade signed the paper with a jagged stroke and shoved it back. "I hope you enjoy the silence, Bianca, because that's all you have left." She stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Fawn let out a single low huff, a final dismissal. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I expected. I just felt a profound sense of relief. The air in the house finally felt like it belonged to me again. I realized then that the silence Jade threatened me with wasn't a punishment, it was a reward. For 34 years, my life had been filled with the noise of her drama, her lies, and the constant hum of my family's enabling. Now that noise was gone. Fawn stood up and leaned against my leg, her heartbeat steady and real. And as I looked at the signed confession, I realized that the truth doesn't just clear the air, it builds a whole new atmosphere. The house was quiet after Jade left, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the past. It was the silence of a structure finally settled on a solid foundation. Aunt Polly and Scott Bowen left shortly after, offering awkward, hushed apologies. Dad stayed at his desk, staring at that confession like it was a map of a country he no longer recognized. My mom tried to catch my eye as I gathered my things, but I simply nodded. I wasn't angry anymore, but the distance between us was now a physical reality, one I was no longer interested in closing. "Let's go home, Fawn," I said. Back in my apartment, the Chicago skyline twinkled through the windows. I sat on the floor with Fawn, and she leaned her elegant head against my shoulder. For years, I had defined myself by how well I handled their judgment. I had built a career while carrying the weight of being the difficult one. Now, that weight was gone. I had audited my life, stripped away the rot, and realized that the only people who mattered were the ones who didn't require me to lie to myself. My phone buzzed, a message from a colleague who never asked me to be the bigger person. "Coffee tomorrow? I want to hear about that new project." I smiled and typed back, "I'm in." Jade thought she was destroying me, but all she did was clear the site for something better. I looked at Fawn, whose tail gave a soft, rhythmic thud against the rug. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who fights for you when the world goes quiet. My sister thought she could write my ending, but I'm the designer, and I've always preferred my own blueprints. If you're stuck in a family that uses your loyalty as a weapon against you, listen to me. You don't owe them your light. Protect your peace, find your people, and never look back. I didn't, and for the first time in 34 years, I can finally breathe.